media, members of the corporate world, representatives of the media, and all distinguished guests. Education and research. This chapter is an exceptional opportunity to invite a scholar of global repute, intellectual capacity of trespassing disciplines. Dabar Excellence Series is a multidisciplinary. The goal is to establish a culture of discussion from the location of corporate/business world. We believe there are intellectual thoughts which shape our managements, acts and market performances. Excuse me. What is important for all of us is to acknowledge open-minded to live in this globalized world of immense opportunities, competition, interaction and interdependence.
Come to the dais and sit. I mean, you are.
She's the Director General of Nepal India Chamber.
Thank you. Happy that Professor Chakravarti is here this morning. One of the, this might be a very inappropriate word to use, but she's so very much in demand all the time. And especially in Nepal, her status as an intellectual is with Spivak's, Professor Spivak's writings. We have students, thousands and thousands of students in Nepal, credentials beginning with term paper writings to PhD research. And no one needs in the humanities and social sciences and also in other disciplines. I have learned during these long years by reading Professor Chakravarti is that one of the striking and what is very significant for me is that when you take Gayatri Spivak, when you try to comprehend our ideas methodologically, strategically, she does not take ideas for granted, and not in concrete rigidity, but very democratically, very conceptually, very discursively. That is what is. And she is one of the academicians, professors who popularized this idea of deconstruction in the English academia, English-speaking world. And then we were cutting across disciplines, Udayan and I.
I'm drawing out, if I feel that I can't stand any longer, then I'll start. I think one of the best signs is that this matches my jacket. It says something symbolically.
Also most grateful to Dabar Nepal for making this visit materially possible. I'm not sure that I can actually match a series which promises you excellence for private enterprise to learn from cultural workers. And in that hope and in that confidence, I and gratitude that there was so much interest in my work. It is a pleasure to come to Nepal at last. I'll tell you a little story that I didn't know if. Asked my father, who was a diagnostic radiologist, to X-ray his queen and treat her. And when my father succeeded, Parish Chandra Chakravarti was his name, the king gave him a bag of gold coins. I have one of them in my safety deposit box in the bank. But more than comfortable means how he could have built a small and really quite beautifully planned, very different Nepal now in 2011. I'm a political person, so I'm glad I came now. I will begin with the question mark because I'm a literary critic, I'm not an entrepreneur. In literary criticism, lasts or prospers if there is no attention to detail. The hard lesson, I repeat, no revolution lasts or prospers. Not trained to know how much to use, when, and how. This is the training of the imagination that makes revolutions last. I began with gratitude to Dabur Nepal. As I said last night to Udayan Ganguly, my new friend, the extraordinary CEO, I did know of the ecological interests and commitments of Dabur from my niece, Dr. Medha Chandra, who is the international campaigner for the Pesticide Action Network, which does not allow you to be ethical and a pacifist. And that is what you fight against, not against the violence. You fight against the impossibility of being a pacifist, which a situation produces. So, if the fact that the previous situation did not allow us to be ethical is forgotten, training in literary reading offers. This training can also come through cultural instructions of other kinds, but often compromised by gender and class. Intellectually and politically just Bengali Bhadralok tradition, which is now becoming more and more upper middle class, completely devoted to the kind of international gadgetry affection that brings confidence that Arun, because after all we've been email friends now for a long time, I have confidence that the way in which Arun Gupta is going about thinking about redoing literary and cultural studies will emphasize this. And that I do what I can to undo the class and gender compromise within the general culture of the world, which locates working for others in little groups. Taken in 1858 by a British captain, Captain Phineas Tribe. So I went to the temple, and all over the base in ancient Tamil, there's this inscription which is completely secular about land, about marriages, about etc. It's a temple, but there it is. And I was standing there and thinking about the vanity of human wishes. Nobody can. That was a great king. Whatever we plan, the future deals with it in its own way. We must make room for it as we plan. Let us call this the future anterior. That too is marked by the question mark. During the anti-Vietnam War movement, there was a powerful song, a persistent effort with a question mark, never allowing victory. I should say, this is the one place where with an Indian passport I walked in without a visa. Everywhere else I had to pay high visa fees and enormous systemic change, which is not about to happen. If finance capital is to flow, there has to be a difference between hard and soft currency. You cannot talk a borderless world. Yet we must keep trying. We would need an enormous system on us. It's easy to say that as a big country bordering a small country, but I say it nonetheless. I'm also part of a minority, although I totally declare again and again that I'm an instant effort with a question mark, never allowing victory. What is a border? It is, of course, the limit outlining nation states, often with a history of conflict. But it is also internal borders, as I indicated a minute ago, in terms of class and gender, in our case caste, and established. I just read, to my huge chagrin in Telegraph yesterday, that foreign direct investment in education is beginning to think about where I'm coming from, what dreams I dream, and end with some musings on islands in this beautiful, teach them how one earns the right to even think of helping, and how, if one did not do just solidarity tourism, every week, then suddenly you're in the tsunami in Indonesia and so on and so forth. This is not really a way it needs to have its desires shifted. This idea that they can help easily because they are where they are, and there's all this plan laid out, and I must also say the Global South. Then judgment among those whose problems he solved. It's easy when they become cannon fodder. People expect from these people a violence that they can then celebrate. Democratic judgment is something else. It's the biggest weapon in the hands of the ruling class. The boy actually what had only just begun. He now has fallen back into the ranks of the rural destitute. The life of my exemplary local assistant there has been destroyed. On one of the many, many islands. We are all islanders. If you can, which has been called by resistant writers the Greater Caribbean. It's just the biggest island in the Caribbean bunch rather than the United States and so on. These are big islands, Eurasia and the Americas. In 2001, I taught for a semester at the University of Hawaii and fell in fascination. When they saw in my passport it was India and Calcutta, they thought that they were looking at a piece of a very well-known Rabindra Sangeet, Jaboi Ami Jaboi, Bani Jete. And what I did was, line by line, singing this island dream song by Tagore, I demonstrated to them how distanced we mainlanders ever in a double bind with our islandedness. History nestles in that denial of the impossible truth of space. If we really want to think global contemporaneity seriously, we will stop being narcissistically focused, a certain class, on nation dreams. It is a different world now. That leads only to competition. As I said yesterday about what connects us rather than constitutions. Constitutions are good. History nestles in that denial of the impossible truth of space. Collectively and bit by bit, rather than all at once like my US students, it's maybe the only way to find out why that field, that cluster, floating in the world ocean, our world, is so uneven a relief map. I want to relate Arun Gupta's ideas and my colleagues here. I've talked a great deal about it, but this is not the place to talk about it. I will say something, however, which you will understand. It's a little bit literate who have read Raymond Williams, and many of you have, to think of his fantastic model for every cultural moment, archaic, which can't, and then comes the pre-emergent where literature is located. We should think about this alternative, thinking of a new regionalism, as it were, rather than nation state, the Southwest Silk Road, not as an alternative, but as an emergent, not in the sense of emergent economies, but in Raymond Williams' sense, something is really bogus, the emergent economy stuff. Don't get me on it another hour. Offering it as the correct, in the mode of truth, if not exactitude, the correct description not only of our region, but of a world. I'm tremendously happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to the hours that still remain until I go back to Calcutta to do something which can only be described, I'm sure, in a Bengali.
Want to suggest some more things to Professor Spivak? We welcome you all to participate.
Good morning, Professor. Once again, I repeat what I said yesterday. It's wonderful to have you at the time when we are in a very crucial junction of making law. So now your topic, a borderless world, reminds me something very extraordinary that is happening between the two giants and we, like small nation in between, India, China, and Nepal. So if it is a borderless world, in literature it sounds good. In WTO, it sounds good because in WTO there are tax evasions between the companies, and the Dava knows well. Side of you is a Dava person, he knows more than me. So it's good, it's in literature, in WTO, business academies, it's good. But what about the concept of social justice? In the social justice, will the subalterns or those people who have not got the justice, are those people marginalized? Let's say females or let's say children or anything, you know better than me. So where does these people or where does the concept of social justice stand in between your concept or the emerging concept of a borderless world? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Can I?
Across the borders of high academia and reach to the people you are talking about, training the teachers, and could you shed more light on how it helps in developing citizenry?
Is there another one is what I saw.
Professor Spivak, I had decided you in connection with private sphere, public sphere, and borderlessness in my qualifying examination. I also had cited Dana Haraway's cyber theory. I would be glad if you saw some connection between or difference in between these two theories.
Thank you. Question very urgently. I'll take these three. Is that all right? That's okay? All right. Now, as I said, in order really to think or even establish a borderless world, we will need enormous systemic changes, and I mentioned, if you were paying any attention to me at all, I mentioned the fact of finance capital, which is bigger than WTO. Trade does not go, world trade does not go around as many times in a day as does finance capital these days. And between capital, production, capitalism, and socialism, that this is not really the place. But I will say this, that you cannot, I have to pay huge amounts of money in order to get there, but that situation is not going to make me make my plans in terms of winning victories that are out of line in the contemporary situation. So is to ignore the suggestion that Ugan made in the beginning that people can learn. See, I said again to my co-worker, John, completely middle-class person from Gobordana, but the Tagore Society had sent him to Japan. So he's saying, Didi, you know, there may be 5-star hotels in Japan, but really it's so much nicer the way you eat with the people, you know, sitting on the floor, just rice and posto. I'm talking about regionalism. So you should certainly work to make the state stronger, because, let me tell you something else, the subaltern has no hope in the face of world governance. The only thing that the world governance folks can do is solve the subaltern, if they ever get close to it. I look at the statistics produced by the DFID and so on in the areas where I teach below the primary school level. So that's a false hope. I welcome your question as I did it yesterday. Those are questions that we all struggle with, but really in a well-lit, well-warmed room where we are all dressed pretty well, sitting around tables, we should pay attention to this kind of counsel rather than, you know, if I were in another place, they would say, why aren't you at the picket lines? And I'd say, man, I am at the picket lines, but this is not the picket line. Language, as I've been laboring with Chinese, not just Han Chinese, but that area speaks other kinds of Chinese. So in order to see, you have to learn the local language, you have to learn to get used to toilet habits that are really not the activists. They already know what to do. They're class enemies of those people. And so they can't make the move. So as to how I make it, I can't say. The problem is that I get so occupied with writing whatever I think and read primary texts again and again, Kant and Marx. I try to read. I'm really reading again because television, Calcutta television is bringing out Devi Chaudharani, Bankim Chandra. My job of reading now is either primary material or old texts that when I read them, I didn't understand what they were saying. And I do not read a lot of, you know, material that's pretty much unilateral, you know, stuff that my colleagues, my friends, more or less on the same level, direct. It's private sector voluntarism. A person with my politics cannot approve of private sector voluntarism, but that's what I do. So I'll just let this mark the moment for this private public question, and maybe I'll read up some more.
China built the Great Wall to keep away, you know, the people who are not within the border, and others who want to have no border with the state, like Africans, South Asians. I think there are so many Indians, you know, dying to live in India. Neeraj Chaudhary said that millions and millions of Indians are living in India under duress, but United States wants to have only, you know, brainy intellectuals like you. And there is another novel by the author Catch-22. The novel is called Take This. There he talks about the uses of poverty. You are talking about as if being the science born in the rich families. And millions of the poor, of course, they also had no choice to be born in the poor families. So there are uses of poverty. Let's decree, let's see, there is a borderless world international government which has distributed the wealth of the world and everybody is equally rich. Let people earn their wealth, their affluence, their success and feel good about it, and trying to erase poverty like erasing the border. I think it's a fine idea, utopian dreamers and intellectuals. And who wants the borderless world? Only those deprived, like the poem in the Statue of Liberty has the quatrain, give us the, deprived and, humble and, poverty-stricken masses.
More questions.
Okay.
I understand your critical position. You don't like what I say, but I'll carry on.
Okay, thank you.
Now the thing is, you are completely right, but to find historically taking large clusters of people as having the same attitude and identify, that's a different thing. What I'm trying to do is to change minds some, because these people, so that's what a teacher does, especially a teacher of literature. This is not do-gooding. And let me assure you, I hate excusing myself from basically a criticism that focuses on large groups as having motives that are not good. We are okay, but the Chinese are crummy and the Swiss are crummy. Holocaust, the Third Reich, into this kind of giving aside on Rwandans and Afghans and so on and so forth. There are good Swiss. These are good Swiss people who were just as critical. Like I said, I'm critical of India. So what I say to everyone is join before beginning to dismiss entire countries in a really, I'm not going to use the nasty adjective, but in that way, as if they all think the same and the government represents exactly what each individual thinks. We who are teachers of literature, when we move into areas where there is opposition, I all or criticize the entire country as having one motive. So that particular engagement with the Swiss, I did indeed do a great deal of research. Then another piece you will see where people who are beloved, as if inside these countries, I think it's wrong to dismiss these countries in this kind of a nationalist way. Now, who wants to travel in a borderless world? A borderless world is not a place where one necessarily travels. I say again and again to people like Lisa Lowe that they think that the whole world wants to manifest destiny, that they should think about people who have no interest in moving, okay? So in fact, there in Bibhum, where it's a small example, but it's a very deep case study if you want to talk sociological nonsense. There in Bibhum, there are people who don't even want to go at the behest of ruling class folks to Vellore.
Small question, I'm Sirish Pradhan from PTA. Do you envision a world towards the end of the 21st century, a world without a passport and without the barriers of a currency, a culture, and a language? Thank you.
Then you haven't seen this picture. But on the US version, there is a picture by Rajiv Lochan, a photograph, who's the head of the modern art thing in Delhi, where in a building in Delhi, about 150 cables are going to the lamppost. Say something, it's called a people's mic, like 1,000 people right in front, take it up and say it. Then the 1,000 people right behind them, take that up and say it. And so the guy in front of me is in the borderlessness that's promised by capitalist globalization. You really communicate easily. What will you have? You will have 2 or 3 big languages. How can we deny the world's wealth of languages? So that to an extent, that kind of borderlessness, where you already almost have some big internet languages, people like us will have to supplement that by emphasizing deep language learning and so on. We cannot be global. Literature is not global. Literature may be global in ways of this universalizable rather than universal that I was speaking about yesterday. But utopia, it must be remembered, is no place. Utopia does not happen. That's the U. And in fact, you can make a mistake in Ethiopia cannot happen, then you're either a fool or a knave. And so the idea of borderlessness is that kind of an idea. Why? Because they're wonderful people, but they cannot become a substitute for. I think of in what ways they were right. And it seems to me that that's the only way to learn. And so I tell you, if there's someone else left in the room who wants to ask me a question which simply points out my obvious faults, that I'm a literary critic, I live in the United States, that the idea of borderlessness is not a practicable idea. And all.
First, of course, I would like to say that your speaking was a fantastically multi-layered and entirely, multidisciplinary stimulating talk. But I would also like to say where my question comes from, so that the question is put in that perspective. I'm an Indologist and art historian, a management person, engaged in private sector for many years, then into non-private, which is looking after economic relations between these two countries, and been in the academic region where I was greatly influenced by, and then I have this intelligent engagement with every moment that I am into. And so sometimes life becomes even more difficult. So my question is, the locus is from there. Everything that you have said about borders outside, trying to bring about a regional integration. I'm using these words as they appear. Bringing out this regional integration where they want to really erase a border in some way or the other, with every country that it has had a very bordered attitude.
Yes. Yes. Dr. Spivak, that was a really stimulating and wonderful and thought-provoking, and as was just said by the previous lady, a very wide-ranging perspective. You've come across not just as a teacher of literature. I should introduce myself. I'm also an art historian, also trained for many years in the US, and I've been very much preoccupied with the business in my own writing on borders. So your talk today about borders was very important. I just want to make a comment more than it's an observation that in the years since I am also old, and I was in the US from the 60s and the very crucial years of Vietnam, then in Chicago. But I think a lot has changed. And the whole question of empowerment of these so-called the minorities, as you call ourselves, has changed. I've seen this when I've gone back to London and when they're playing Diwali in Trafalgar Square. I'd never seen it when I was there in school in England. That is happening. And whether the US likes it or dislikes it, whether the UK likes it, especially the UK, I've seen the change, there is beginning to be a different perception. So I'd like you to comment on that. Thank you.
Death of a discipline, somewhere you have talked against globalization. Instead of globalization, you have put forward a new word, planetarity. I want to know, what does it mean by planetarity, and what problems do you see with the use of the word globalization in today's context? Thank you.
Okay. But I will share the same questions and I will say what I can say. This is a very serious thing about, and it's very interesting for me because I take it you're Indian, right? 40-minute paper, it's hard for me to make all the qualifications, and you're right, the things I say are sometimes counterintuitive and in a contradictory relationship with something which is its opposite. If I wanted to really work on it, then I would have to go into theoretical areas which
Last question perhaps.
Yes? Well, I think again medicine poison. You know? I mean, some of you have seen this. The real kind of super heads of all these IT things in top know, I mean, those who really know, the real complicated programmers, that there is no distance learning for developing. The people who write about uploading, you know how our head computers will upload all of that. The real neural network scientists never write like that. The digital resources for the places where they are. But the Facebook culture is not a substitute for democracy. You should read the blogs, mindless and stupid. That's not only in terms of the movement of money, the movement of medicine, the movement of all kinds of things that need to be moved fast, and all kinds of calculations that need to be made. It's wonderful. Research has not been helped by what in Hindi is called Googlana. You know how to use it critically. There are computers in my area, here and there. What do they use it for? Pornography or gambling? You have to know, you have to have a mind that wants to do certain kinds of things in order to use the IT stuff. In Italy, they have not been dramatized yet. When Dante writes vulgar eloquence, he's talking about Latin Creole, the languages that we call Italian. So this thing is like that. And I said to them, since you are going to have an IT center which will be good, you knew Kwara State University, North Ibadan and Ghana Legon and so on, doing that. So those are my thoughts. I'm very glad you asked this question because it's a very important question.
That was a delightful session. Dabar Nepal thanks Professor Gayatri Chakravarti.
হ্যাঁ, আমি ব্যবহার করতে